of La Raza. The race. I was talking about the influence that this group and its personnel have over our government, over these individuals, and there's others. John McCain appointed an individual to the top ranks of his presidential team, Juan Hernandez. You may have seen him on TV. He was born in America, but holds dual citizenship with Mexico. And he was McCain's Hispanic outreach director. And Hernandez once held the same position for Mexico's former president, Vicente Fox. And in 2001, speaking of Mexican Americans, he said that, quote, I want the third generation, the seventh generation, I want them all to think Mexico first. This is all on Liberty and Tyranny, by the way. I dug it all up. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, other business interests in the United States are economic enablers for this mentality. And they use their considerable clout with Congress to urge the importation of even more low-skilled and unskilled laborers. Oh, it's true. And it's a disaster. We were fighting a couple years ago in the Supreme Court Landmark Legal Foundation in defense of Arizona and some of these other states that were merely trying to protect their citizens and their borders by piggybacking federal immigration law. Now, when you listen to the media and the Democrats and some Republicans, they attacked Arizona and other states of abusing their power, of going off on their own, of hating minorities, all flat-out lies, as you can imagine. But in our brief with the Supreme Court, we pointed out what the Mexican government and some of these other governments were like when it came to people who were in their country illegally. I'll give you some examples. The Congressional Research Service's 2011 report to Congress, this went to the Supreme Court, so the justices read this. Their report on Mexico a few years ago provides an eye-opening examination of human rights abuses inside that country. Citing U.S. State Department data, CRS details serious human rights problems that still exist in Mexico. You want to hear some of them? How they treat people who are there from other countries? Quote, these included unlawful killing by security forces, kidnappings, physical abuse, poor and overcrowded prison conditions, arbitrary arrests and detention, corruption, inefficiency, lack of transparency that engendered impunity in the judicial system, confessions coerced through torture, and violence against journalists leading to self-censorship. In 2010, 9 Mexican journalists died and 4 disappeared. Societal problems highlighted in the report included domestic violence, trafficking in persons, social and economic discrimination against some members of the indigenous population, and child labor. Human rights violations in Mexico. What other human rights abuses are perpetrated in Mexico? And by the way, on their citizens too. And why do I bring this up? Because that's the silent partner of the Democrat and Republican parties in this country, the Mexican government. Let's stop pretending it's something else. Multiple cases of forced disappearances allegedly committed by Army and police forces, a problem with the United Nations has also recently identified as a serious human rights issue that Mexico needs to address. Corruption was reported to be a major problem, particularly at the state and local level, with police involved in kidnapping, extortion, or providing protection for organized crime and drug traffickers. Impunity was pervasive and was a reason that many victims were reluctant to file complaints. So a lot of these folks come here, don't they? But we can't address what goes on in Mexico. No. Illegal immigrants in Mexico face grave dangers. The Congressional Research Service reports, quote, the Mexican government has actively promoted migrants' rights internationally and the rights of Mexican migrants in the United States, but has been criticized by human rights organizations for failing to protect migrants from other countries who transit its territory. Beatings, kidnapping, rape, murder are common dangers for individuals illegally present in Mexico. Although few cases are officially registered and virtually none are ever prosecuted, some human rights organizations and academics estimate that as many as 6 in 10 women and girl migrants experience sexual violence during the journey. Now, what about some of these other countries? Mexico's not the only foreign nation participating in this kind of behavior. and trying to influence our immigration laws in this country. For example, the State Department reports that El Salvador, Ecuador, and Guatemala, among others, have long records of widespread human rights abuses in their countries. In El Salvador, the Department of State reported that in 2010, the following human rights problems continued: isolated, unlawful killings by security forces, harsh, violent, overcrowded prison conditions, lengthy pretrial detention, high levels of impunity for crime and abuse of official authority, official corruption. This is from your State Department. Violence and discrimination against women, child abuse and forced child prostitution, trafficking in persons, violence and discrimination against minorities, child labor, and inadequate enforcement of laws. I could read more about Ecuador, but that would take too much time. The list is so long. You want to hear about Guatemala? Perhaps the most atrocious of them all. State Department 2010, assessment of what goes on there. The government's failure to investigate and punish unlawful killings committed by members of the security forces, widespread societal violence, including numerous killings, corruption and substantial inadequacies in the police and judicial sectors, police involvement in serious crimes, including unlawful killings, drug trafficking, extortion, impunity for criminal activity, harsh and dangerous prison conditions, arbitrary arrest and detention. Let's see, what else? Killing of journalists and trade unionists, discrimination and violence against women, trafficking in persons, discrimination against indigenous communities, on and on and on, and other countries, and we can go on and on and on. Mark, why are you reading all that? These are the countries that are lobbying the Obama administration and both political parties for comprehensive immigration reform in our own country. And our politicians are more responsive to these despots than they are to we the people. I look at the Mexican immigration laws and their constitution. I've done this twice before over the last 10 or 12 years, just to give you an idea of how humane and beneficent we are in this country. You know, you listen to our politicians who create these circumstances to begin with. You listen to our news media, which really isn't a news media at all. You listen to these ethnic front groups, these radical organizations that promote balkanization and anti-Americanism, many of them, and you'd think we're the worst country on the face of the earth. And I've pointed out before, if this is true, why do people keep coming here illegally? Because it's not true. And it's important to give you an example. Mexico's immigration law from FactReal. Mexico welcomes only foreigners who will be useful to a Mexican society. Foreigners are admitted into Mexico according to their possibilities of contributing to national progress, quote unquote. That's Article 32 of their immigration law. Immigration officials must ensure that immigrants will be useful elements for the country, that they have the necessary funds for their sustenance and for their dependents. That's Article 34. Foreigners may be barred from the country if their presence upsets the equilibrium of the national demographics, when foreigners are deemed detrimental to economic or national interests, when they do not behave like good citizens in their own country, when they have broken Mexican laws, and when they are found to be physically or mentally unhealthy. That's Article 37. The Secretary of Governance may suspend or prohibit the admission of foreigners when he determines it to be in the national interest. That's Article 38. Mexican authorities must keep track of every single person in the country. Federal, local, and municipal police must cooperate with federal immigration authorities upon request, that is, to assist in arrests of illegal immigrants in Mexico. That's Article 73. A national population registry keeps track of, quote, every single individual who comprises the population of the country and verifies each individual's identity. That's Articles 85 and 86. A national catalog of foreigners tracks foreign tourists and immigrants, that's Article 87, and assigns each individual with a unique tracking number. That's Article 91. Foreigners with fake papers or who enter the country under false pretenses may be imprisoned. Foreigners with fake immigration papers may be fined or imprisoned, Article 116. Foreigners who sign government documents, quote, with a signature that is false or different from that which he normally uses, are subject to a fine and imprisonment. That's Article 116. Foreigners who fail to obey the rules will be fined, deported, and or imprisoned as felons. Foreigners who fail to obey a deportation order are to be punished. Article 117. Foreigners who are deported from Mexico and attempt to re-enter the country without reauthorization can be imprisoned for up to 10 years. Article 118. You want to hear more? Foreigners who violate the terms of their visa may be sentenced to up to 6 years in prison. Articles 119, 120, 121. Foreigners who misrepresent the terms of their visa while in Mexico, such as working without a permit, can be imprisoned. Under Mexican law, illegal immigration is a felony. The general law on population says, quote, a penalty of up to 2 years in prison and a fine of up to 300 to 500 pesos, 300 to 5,000 pesos, will be imposed on the foreigner who enters the country illegally. Article 123. Foreigners with legal immigration problems may be deported from Mexico instead of being imprisoned. Article 125. Foreigners who attempt against national sovereignty or security will be deported. That is, act against. Mexicans who help illegal aliens enter the country are themselves considered criminals under the law. A Mexican who marries a foreigner with the sole objective of helping the foreigner live in the country is subject to up to 5 years in prison. Article 127. Shipping and airline companies that bring undocumented foreigners into Mexico will be fined. Article 132. Now, I could go through the Mexican Constitution, too. The problem is I've got another 3 pages. Just as inspiring and enlightening and humane as the 1 page I just read to you. Don't be suckered, ladies and gentlemen. We're the most humane nation on the face of the earth when it comes to people who come here illegally. The most humane nation on the face of the earth. Our critics are in no position to criticize. None. But they're really not the issue, are they? It's what's going on from within that's the issue, isn't it? Oh, yes, it is. See, the Democrats understand something. The more low-skilled and unskilled labor you import into this country, the more votes that they get. And no matter what Republicans do to try and stem this, this is a fact. This is a reality. Because unlike 100 years ago, as former Governor Lamb was pointing out in the speech that I read to you earlier, we don't really promote assimilation in this country anymore. We promote balkanization. And not just the government, but corporate America, too. You pick up a phone, you make a call, press 1 for English, 2 for Spanish. What the hell is that? You go to Mexico, do they say press 1 for Spanish and 2 for English? But the Democrats have figured this out, ladies and gentlemen.